Kia ora everyone, I'm not going to bother with an introduction other than to say I'm a statistic. Young, poor and Polynesian. The chances are better than even that I didn't vote in the last election and that I won't vote in the coming election. At least that's what my demographic profile would suggest. The reality is a little different. I did vote in the last election and I plan on voting in the coming election. But what separates me from voters of my age, income and ethnicity? I can point to personal factors, but I think we need a theory. Now this is going to be a trite declaration, but indulge me. Māori voting habits are complex. We know that the Māori voting rate is lower than the national rate, and it has been since 1935. But what explains the voting gap? Is it part of the Māori cultural pathology, or is it a matter of age, education and employment? Well, research supports the second point. Cultural identity has little impact on voting. What accounts for variation in the Māori voting patterns are socio-economic factors. The orthodox position is captured in rational choice theory. Rational choice theory draws on what we know about market activity to explain what we don't know about political activity. The central thesis is this: a person decides to vote if the benefits outweigh the costs. Now, I've reduced that to its bones, and it's a criminal oversimplification, but it makes intuitive sense, does it not? Those with fewer social resources, like, say, an education, and those with fewer economic resources, like a job or a high income, are not going to have the political incentive to vote. The cost of acquiring, say, knowledge outweighs the benefits of a single vote. But rational choice theory comes with a big proviso. It's very controversial. It sounds like something out of the Chicago School of Economics, and that terrifies me. More importantly, I don't think it can account for ethnicity. Comparative history might. An important theory to emerge in the United States to explain non-voting among Black Americans is isolationist theory. This is where I'm going to get even more controversial than rational choice theory. That theory holds that structural barriers, like political exclusion through voter suppression, discouraged Blacks from participating in the political process. As a result, they became socially alienated and politically disengaged. I think a similar theory can be applied to Māori voters. State-led exclusion obviously didn't approach Jim Crow levels, but political and economic exclusion did and does exist. Perhaps counterintuitively, the site of that political exclusion was the Maori Electorates. Introduced as a temporary measure in 1867, the electorates were extended indefinitely in 1876. The electorates remain today, they're quite literally in the room next door, but the electorates didn't offer, to quote Professor Andrew Geddes, representation of an equal nature. Despite the explosive growth in the Māori population, the electorates were capped at 4 until the introduction of MMP. The Māori electorates were a site of, as Professor Mulgan writes in his seminal book, Political Neglect. Professor Ranginui Walker describes the electorates as a token gesture designed to entrench Māori political subjugation. I'm not going to go that far, but I think they're undoubtedly right. Why? Because Māori voters were underrepresented for more than a century. The Māori population grew enormously, the Māori electorates didn't. This is important because structural conditions shape group characteristics. It would be bizarre to imagine that over a century of political isolation has not affected Māori voting habits. With political isolation concentrated in Māori communities, I submit that many communities were and are disconnected with networks that facilitate participation. This is where I delve into another theory, network theory. Networks are important because they spur conditional decision makers. We know that. However, the Māori electorates, in combination with other factors like urban displacement in the 20th century, disrupted the development of those political networks in Māori communities. Whether by accident or design, the Māori electorates operated to inhibit Māori political participation. Like voter suppression laws in the Jim Crow era, the Māori electorates were, which, let me repeat, entrenched underrepresentation, they led to political isolation. But here's the more important question: how do we overcome it? Well, if you accept the premise of my speech, then the answer seems quite obvious. We need to build political networks in Māori communities. For example, many young Māori aren't socialised into a political network and instead must integrate into one over time. For example, if they acquired a job and joined a trade union, or if they were an entrepreneur and started a business and joined, say, a business association. However, the actual form political networks take as the subject of another session, so I won't go into it too much, but the experience in Black America is instructive. Blacks have gone from being the racial group least likely to vote to, as of 2008, the racial group most likely to vote, thanks to, it seems, network building by churches, youth groups, NGOs like Rock the Vote, and political parties themselves who've improved their targeting methods amazingly. Now, none of this is to deny the importance of negative socio-economic factors which over-occur in Māori communities and do contribute to non-voting. Isolationist theory should be seen as complementary, an alternative way to explain a complex and nuanced problem. I'm taking what we know, and it should be said we don't know enough, and attempting to explain it. Yet I think that's a logical place to start. Any discussion about non-participation must reference historical political isolation. That's where isolation theory will come in, and then contemporary economic isolation, which is where you could build a place for rational choice theory. If statistics speak, surely that is their first message. Thank you.